Is Biden about to release the handcuffs that have been holding back Ukraine and allowing them to use American weapons to strike targets inside of Russia? Now, before we even ask you that question, you got to ask, is that something that's useful to the United States? Is that something that's even useful to the Ukraine side, for example? To be honest with you, is this leading somewhere that has even the possibility or potential for positive outcome for Ukraine? That should be, well, I won't say the primary criteria. It should be the secondary one. The primary should be, is this going to help the United States? Is this going to help the United States be safer? And then right after that, will it help the Ukraine side? Because we should actually care some about them if we're trying to help them in a war. And I'm not sure the answer is going to be what Biden is thinking it's going to be. And to help unpack this stuff, we have back again former CIA intelligence analyst Larry Johnson. Larry, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Danny. Good to be with you.
Well, listen, I know this is something you deal with a whole lot, so we're looking forward to talking about this, and we'll just start with that topic right off the top, even before I get into some of the news that we have to get your reaction to. But when you hear that about much more conversation about the United States talking openly about should we use some of the ATACMS, HIMARS, or whatever systems that we have to strike targets into Russia, let me ask you first of all off the top. Will that matter? If the answer is yes, and we take the handcuffs off, will it matter?
No, won't matter at all. You know, the problem, a lot of this decision making is being made by people who never played sports and never served in the military. And why do I say sports and military? Well, in sports, you learn that there's a winner and a loser. You know, you don't, real genuine professional sports, you don't get a participation ribbon. That you win or you lose. Within the military, you get taught early on that the consequences of losing there can cost you your life. So here are people making these decisions about, let's take those ATACMS off and let them bomb inside Russia. Well, there are lots of different kinds of violence. You can go out on 4th of July, blow up a bunch of firecrackers. That's violent. You can throw those firecrackers into a pot of gasoline and have somebody standing next to it. That'll be the different kind of violence. What the United States is encouraging the Ukrainians to do is it's mindless violence. It achieves nothing. It's not like it's taking out a critical Russian piece of infrastructure, or that it's going to be the destruction of a battalion, a brigade. Hell, let's go with the big bomb, a division. You know, so we are killing 5,000 people in one blow. I mean, you know, they don't have that capability. But I'm just saying, if that's your goal, so let's say you kill 5,000 Russians. Their army's 1.3 million right now, with a reserve of 2 million. 5,000, great loss for the people who, the relatives of those folks. But it doesn't change a thing. And what the Ukrainians are doing are just irritating the Russians. That's all. It's an irritant factor, and it's increasing Russian resolve to put them down eventually.
Right. That's one of the parts that gets almost no consideration at all, is what the reaction is on the other side. I think that there's this hope, unfounded and unexamined, that, well, if we do this, it'll have a net negative effect, without even talking about what that net effect is.
Right.
Now, it gets even worse than that, though, to me, because there's this is going to shock you, some dishonesty going on with how a lot of this stuff is being discussed here. So first of all, let me show you what Zelensky said to the New York Times a couple of days ago, trying to make his case.
Як їм відповісти, коли вони б'ють по твоїх містах? І їх далекобійність така, тому що вони стоять в найближчих селах до кордону України з Росії, звідти б'ють, знаючи, що ми бити не будемо, знаючи, що вони прикриваються цивільним населенням, бо розташування їх зброї серед цивільного населення. Вони спокійно на це йдуть, розуміючи, що наші партнери не дають нам дозвіл, як ви сказали. І тут, коли ми говоримо про ATACMS, атакамси, або ми говоримо про хаймарси, або ми говоримо про артилерійський снаряд, або ми говоримо про відповідні ракети, Storm Shadow, скальпи тощо. Ми не маємо дозволу бити по території Російської Федерації, по їх військовим розташуванням. Це те саме, що ППО. Як нам захиститись від постійних ударів з території Росії?
Okay, first of all, that's just nonsense. He's saying that we can't strike back the Russians. They strike the Russians all the time in Russia. I mean, they've been hitting Belgorod for I guess the probably more than half of this war here. A bunch here recently. They've been striking into the Donetsk area, into the civilian areas there, almost since the outset of this. So they do this stuff all the time with their own weapons. And now that we've seen this larger stuff, longer range into some of the energy infrastructure within Russia. So I don't know what he's even talking about that he can't strike.
Yeah, well, number one, Ukraine has been regularly shelling into the Donetsk for the last 10 years. I mean, daily. We're not talking on occasion. They've been killing civilians. And again,
beyond right.
Yeah, and again, when they're doing this, it's one thing if you're shelling to hit a military target to degrade military capabilities, but they're hitting civilians. They're hitting restaurants and shops. They're not even taking out power grids. They're hitting homes and churches and schools. So now here he is saying, "Oh yeah, we're being held back." Well, that's a lie. I mean, they've been doing it for quite a while. Russia, by contrast, has been very, very careful to avoid hitting civilian targets. They've always gone after military targets or where there are military using hospitals and schools as shelter and as a barracks, for lack of a better word. And then Russia's also going after the electrical infrastructure, taking that out, but it's avoiding killing civilians because, and when you think back to World War II, even then, the Soviets did not have a policy of massive bombing of civilian areas. They avoided civilian casualties. It was the West that was killing civilians on a large scale basis. So, recognizing that this is, look, Ukraine is a dying country, and it's a dead man walking. You take a chicken it's alive, cut its head off, that chicken will still run around for a bit till it bleeds out. That's the situation Ukraine is in, and that there's nothing the West can do. I mean, nothing that is going to change this outcome.
Yeah, and when you one of the other absurdities of really what Zelensky's talking about there, because he's acting like their hands are tied, like that they can't strike these Russians at all, and of course there's no prohibition that there ever has been. But the fact that they have been striking these areas in the southern part of Russia is the precise reason why Russia has launched this offensive north of Kharkiv. And according to Putin, he has openly said this is to push a buffer zone so that they can no longer range into Belgorod and some of these other areas here. So that shows right there that he's already doing it. So then you just have to wonder, then why does he make these kinds of statements? Why is he wanting specifically to use, whether it's Storm Shadow or the HIMARS or the ATACMS, et cetera? Why does he want those specific weapons to be able to strike longer into Russia when he's already doing it here?
Yeah, he's trying to bully or shame the United States into doing more and getting involved actually in the war. The situation Ukraine is in right now, they're like a boxer, but a one-arm boxer. One arm is amputated or broken, useless. They're standing on one leg too, and they only have one eye. And their opponent is a guy with 6 arms and 3 legs. And the problem with that was, okay, I can punch with my one hand, but where do you punch? Whereas this guy with 6 arms, he's going to hit you north. He's going to hit you in the middle. He's going to hit you south. He's going to hit you north, south, middle at the same time. What the Russians are doing now is they are throwing those punches all along that line of contact. And it's Ukraine that does not have limitless resources. It's very limited resources. And so it's having to try to figure out, well, where do we deploy? And right now they've deployed some of their best troops up towards Sumy because the Russians are massing there, but the Russians are known for what's called maskirovka, disguising what they're doing. That may be just simply to entice Ukrainians to weaken their positions at other places, bring them into one spot. But the point of all this is Russia is not fighting this war like the West expected it to fight.
Yeah, I think that's an
Russia's
important
fighting
point.
the war the way Russia has decided it's going to fight. And we better get our arms and mind around that.
Yeah, I saw a number of headlines from some of these places that love to have any kind of headline that's anti-Russian or negative Russia, and they said that this whole Kharkiv operation has been a complete tactical failure for Russia because they didn't take the city of Kharkiv, even though they're saying that's not their objective and it's never been their objective, and they didn't even put enough troops toward that. Yet we'd like to call it failure because that makes us feel better, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's just so absurd. That I looked up the differences in troop size after I heard Cavoli make a really stupid statement about how weak and the Russian army is. Right now, as of today, the United States Army, the strength of the U.S. Army, 452,000 plus. The strength of the Russian Army, 1.3 million. My math's not great, but that's about 3 times the size. And he said, well, what about our reserves, Army Reserve, National Guard? Yeah, let's throw them into the mix. That'll get us up to around 1.3 million. Except the Russians have reserve forces of 2 million. So, you know the math on that, Danny.
Yeah.
From an attacking force against the defending force, attacking force usually has to have a 3-to-1 advantage. Well, with those numbers, if we go with the full up 3.3 million on the Russian side, that means we got to come up with about 9 million fellas that are going to take on the Russians. That
which of
is
course
not going to happen.
And to your point a second ago about that you think that a lot of this is for Zelensky wanting to draw us in. I think he exposed himself and that desire a little bit more when later on that same conversation when he said this.
Що ви збиваєте ракети, які б'ють по енергетиці. Можна піднімати свої літаки, а ви і так їх піднімаєте. Ви повинні знати, що країни НАТО і так їх піднімають, бо ракети йдуть в напрямку західних наших партнерів, в прикордонних наших сусідах. То у мене питання, а в чому проблема? Чому не можна збивати? Це захист? Так. Це напад на російську? Ні. Ви збиваєте російські літаки і там гинуть російські льотчики, російські пілоти? Ні. Так а в чому тут питання щодо втягування країн НАТО в війну? Немає такого питання. Це захист.
Yeah, I mean, what's the problem? Just come in on my side. I mean, he tried the whole no-fly zone at the beginning. That didn't fly. And they were like, oh, no, we can't do that. But I think what he's talking about here is that he's looking at what happened on April the 13th in Israel, where the U.S. Air Force basically ran roughshod for the IDF and shot down whatever 70% of the drones. And he wants the same thing. He's like, yeah, don't go to war with them. Just shoot the stuff down. What's the problem?
Yeah, well, because the United States can't shoot them down. That's the problem. For every right now, the United States is making 500 Patriot missiles a year. 500. It's not like they started off, I guess about 10 years ago with 10,000 in stock. So 500, additional each year. That's an additional 5,000. So let's say total Patriot missile strength right now is 20,000 worldwide. For every incoming ballistic missile that the Russians fire, or cruise missile, you're going to use 2 Patriots to go after it. All right? How many missiles have the Russians fired since the start of the special military operation? Well, that's over 7,400. That means we're going to use up 75% of our existing stock if we shot them all down. But even the Patriots have proven incapable or very ineffective at shooting down Russian hypersonic missiles. They can't even touch those, and they're limited success against the cruise missiles. So what this is exposing is that the United States is not capable of sustaining a modern battle against a peer. We simply do not have the depth. And we are so thin, and we'd be through our reserves within 2 or 3 weeks.
Right. Yeah.
And the Russians planned for this. I mean, they planned. They recognize, hey, we could be in this for the long haul. So, better store up some stuff in the warehouse.
Yeah, and build up more facilities to create these things on a faster scale than we seem to be able to do that.
Right.
Now then, let's jump to what some of our folks are saying. So let's do it. That's what Zelensky's asking for. Now, here is just a couple of days ago, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was asked, can we use America, or I'm sorry, can Ukraine use American stuff to strike into Russia? Now, it's a pretty straightforward question. I think it deserves an answer. I think it's a valid question, but here's how he did try to address that.
We have been clear about providing Ukraine the ability to defend its sovereign territory. And again, the dynamics of an aerial engagement, I leave it up to the experts, but certainly, our expectation is that they continue to use the weapons that we provided on targets inside of Ukraine. Now, the aerial dynamics a little bit different, and so, but again, don't want to speculate on any one or any type of engagement here at the podium. So,
it's off limits or not off limits?
So, final question. We'll go here.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
So he's just not going to answer the question. I mean, it's just the classic obfuscation of just dancing around with a bunch of words and just not answering the obvious question. And look, if the answer is yes, then say yes. And if the answer is no, we put that off limits, then say that. But why say word salad and not answer the question?
Lloyd Austin makes Forrest Gump look smart, and that's saying something. I mean, good Lord, instead of trying to lay out clearly what are our objectives, what is it we're trying to accomplish? Do we want to get into a shooting match with Russia? Well, no. Okay, so let's state that up front. Look, we've been willing to support Ukraine up to this point, but we're not willing to get engaged with Russia in a shooting war because they will beat us, and they will beat us badly. We talk about our F-35s. Man, we got this great aircraft. Yeah, 29% of them are operationally capable.
Right.
But they look good in the hangar, man. They look good in the hangar.
And the videos we make are out of this world. Good videos.
Well, hey, look, I've got a buddy, without revealing which air base he's at. They're supposed to have 24 of these F-35s. They've got 6, and the rest of them are stuck up at Lockheed Martin because Lockheed Martin can't figure out the software.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is across the board. So Ukraine is going to try to do something desperate. I wouldn't put it past them to actually try to pull off an attack and strike on the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Russia's been very clear about not targeting nuclear power plants, its own or what remains within Ukraine's power. They're taking out the thermal power plants, the hydroelectric power plants, the coal-fired power plants. They're doing all that, but they're not touching the nuclear. And because they think that's a red line. Well, they are desperate now. When people are panicked and they feel that their life's at risk, they do crazy, desperate stuff. And that's what we're witnessing both in Ukraine and in the halls of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, which is troubling to me. And we're going to get to in a minute back to that the question you asked about what's the strategy, what's the objective, because that is vital to address here. But before we get there, I want to talk about something else, which you mentioned just a second ago, in that you're talking about the limited capacity we have. Indirectly, the Secretary of State actually addressed that when he was asked a similar question about can the U.S. give more stuff to the Ukraine side. Check this out.
On the Patriot batteries, as I mentioned, we are intensely focused on Patriots and other forms of air defense, and making sure that we can find them, bring them to Ukraine. Kharkiv, of course, is one urgent priority. There are others. All I can tell you is this is something we discussed in detail and that we're actively and urgently working on.
We're looking for them. I mean, what do you mean you're looking for them? You don't know where our stuff is? You don't know how much we have? Well, of course, the answer is he does. But
Well,
again, we can't just give a simple answer. Hey, I know
yeah.
you want more Patriots. We're not giving them to you. We don't say that. Instead, we just this fiction that we're looking for them.
Yeah, well, he acts like they're a bunch of puppies that have wandered off into the woods. Where are they? They got to be there somewhere. Look,
Okay.
I think the total number of launchers that were made initially was like 1,500 launchers. Now, whatever launchers we've sent to Ukraine, most of them have been destroyed by the Russians through counter battery fire, number one. And then even if you have the launchers, then as I mentioned earlier, you got the problem that the current Lockheed Martin who produces these, their current setup can only produce basically 1.5 per day, one missile. And so when you got to fire two of those off, and I guess the cost of them is like, maybe $2 million a piece. So, you got to fire two. There's 4 million out the door right away. And the United States, we have failed. We have created a military infrastructure that is completely subservient to politics and to corporate bottom lines, to enriching military industrial corporations. We do not produce weapons and equip our military, whether it's the Army, the Air Force, Marines, or Navy, with weapons that are tied to a specific national security strategy. So that's why we can put out an F-35 that, as Matt Gaetz called it, $100 million paperweight, which is exactly what it is. Yeah, you spend $100 million on an airplane that's going to require significant hours of maintenance for every 1 hour that you operate it in combat.
Yeah.
And then you can't keep them in the air
Right.
because 29% of them are only capable. Ditto for M1 Abrams. I mean, just run down the list. The Javelin, that's pretty costly and complicated.
Before we get away from it, sorry, I want to run back to the Patriot system there, because I have heard some reports. I wonder if you can illuminate any knowledge you may have on this, that the Russians can do math, apparently, and they understand limitations of production and capacity. And so I've seen reports that very often when Russia will launch any kind of missile strikes into some of these energy infrastructure, for example, or where they have troop buildups or whatever, that first they'll launch a lot of Shaheeds, $20,000-$30,000 drones, or even some dummy missiles that are specifically designed to absorb a lot of these expensive interceptor missiles. Then they'll bring in the ones that actually they want to get through to hit the target. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, that's exactly. Hey, go back to your old Army tactics. How you got to send out a patrol sometimes to figure out where the enemy's positioned, where they're firing from, what kind of troop strength and concentration they have. So that's what the Russians are doing. They will fire some junk initially because they know that the Patriot missile batteries can't distinguish between what's junk and what's not. And so when you're burning up, $4 million going after a $50,000 drone, it's pretty cost beneficial for the Russians. So that's exactly what they've done. And frankly, that's part of what Iran did when it attacked Israel. They sent that drone mass out to suck up and absorb a lot of the anti-aircraft, the air defense systems, as well as to let's figure out where they are and what they're firing.
Yeah, they got
cruise missiles.
We expended somewhere around $1 billion total repulsing that one shot. That's an enormous amount of money.
Yeah. So it's the Russians. What we fail to appreciate is that what the Russian experience in World War II, and I think we talked about this last time, it still resonates with them. It's vibrant. It's a living memory because almost every family lost somebody. Yeah, and they remember it, and it's remembered from generation to generation. And I think I told you the story of this one Izvestia reporter, a young woman, 26, who was interviewing me. And when I asked her about this, she started telling me about her great-grandfather and great-grandmother, and she started getting teared up, talking about people who had died in that war. So Russia understands this. The United States is so cavalier about war because we don't pay a price. Most people in this country have not made any kind of sacrifice whatsoever, much less having lost a loved one or when the wounded vets come back and they're missing legs and arms and they've got traumatic brain injuries, most Americans think, oh, well, the government takes care of them. The hell they do. Once you get past that initial treatment, a lot of times you're on your own. And so it is, but none of these members of Congress, they're not losing their kids.
Right.
And
Yeah,
the
like
same with
Ukraine.
Merkel in Germany, no children. Macron, no children. I'm not sure Rishi Sunak's got any kids, but man, they're eager to send other
Yeah,
people's
there's
kids out to
definitely
fight and die.
that's a fact there.
Yeah.
So I want to shift gears a little bit here because there's one particular thing that has not been in the news that is, I think, absolutely should, and we want to highlight it here. I think there should be a scandal, a big scandal and a big issue about the corruption in Ukraine. Now, a lot of people just toss that word around there, but they don't have any specific applications.
Right.
There is a very specific application which should have us hot. So you got Zelensky. We just showed you. He's talking about, I want some more patriots. I want you to do my dirty work in the air and all this kind of stuff. But here's the thing. We have given billions and billions of dollars specifically for their defense. But now when Russia came through in what was probably expected to be a tough slog to get 10 kilometers pushed back from their border north of Kharkiv, instead, they found this when they landed. Check this out.
Самі бачили, як тут все палає, так кожну ніч так.
Do you think there were good enough fortifications here?
Не було нічого тут підготовлено. Зовсім нічого. От зовсім нічого. Всі позиції зараз відбудовує піхота власноруч. Таніці підготовлені професійні військові. Це можна бачити з їхньої екіпіровки, з їхньої тактики.
So this is a guy on the front line. It's where the fighting is going on. And he sees the reality. He doesn't see the spin. He sees the reality. So we spent tens of billions of dollars to help them. And I think Gary's even got, that's the one right there. So back in April and also some in March, Zelensky was going through and looking at all these fantastic fortifications in the Kharkiv area, which our money had spent. And he was told that, they had, this something like the Surovikin lines, just as good as the Russians had built their defenses, the Ukraine side had, and all this kind of stuff, except that when it came time to actually fight, there was none there. In many areas, there was insufficient defenses. You've probably seen these pictures where there was piles of these dragon's teeth that were not put up, etc. But even where they were of really low quality. So you have these guys, there's been where is the outcry over all the money that we spent for making defenses and they didn't even build them?
Yeah, no, I mean, that was the real revelation. Is we now know that this was a propaganda video, because when you first saw it, you said, "Boy, those look like some pretty robust defenses." And they built some underground shelters, and they've got with the dragon's teeth out, and they've got some firing points where we're going to be able to combat attacking forces. And then when the Russians stroll in, they just, because that one area was just, maybe it was a mile long tops, but we're talking about a need to defend something that was maybe 80, 100 miles long. And they took the money and ran. It was that old Steve Miller song, just take the money and run.
And here's the irony. So we talk about how Ukraine is the democracy that's worth fighting for and defending, right? So when it came time for an election, who had an election, who didn't have it? Russia had an election, they held it, right? And Putin stood for office. Zelensky didn't even run for office. Now then you have this corruption going on here, and there's just silence. No one's saying anything. I've not seen anyone's been arrested. Nobody's in jail, even though their troops are dead because of the lack of defenses. But now then you also simultaneously see in Russia, apparently there's a big corruption scandal there, and they put lots of guys, generals, in jail. How is it that it's not happening on the Ukraine side?
Yeah, no, I mean, you nailed it exactly. It's a black and white image. On the Russian side, they're white. They're cracking down on corruption at a level. I know they've arrested at least 5 generals, and guys who were, the day that they were arrested, they were seen sitting in council with Putin, and they walk out, put the cuffs on them, say, "Come on," because they've been taking bribes. Well, in Ukraine, it's a way of life. But the other thing is now, because Zelensky's term expired Tuesday morning at 12:01 a.m., he was no longer a legitimate president. Yes, but he professed, "Oh, we're in a time of war. We can't have elections." Really? Man, how did Abraham Lincoln pull that off in 1864?
Right.
How did Franklin Delano Roosevelt manage to hold an election with his vice president Harry Truman in 1944? So we know right away that that's nonsense. It's just lie and spin. That is, as long as you don't know anything about history, you can get away with it. Zelensky, the chaos that's developing, it's very reminiscent of that movie Downfall, which is about Hitler's last day in the bunker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because just the other day, the Wall Street Journal reported, here's Zelensky, this little short guy who's, I don't think he's ever probably been in a bar fight, but he's yelling at his generals, yelling at them. Okay, he's lucky they just didn't get him in a corner and smack him in the face, say, hey, you don't get to talk to me like that. So when you see that kind of breakdown in decorum and leadership, you know that the end is near. This is not going to last a long time. There is going to be a leadership change. And with that leadership change, because the other thing that's taking place, the recruitment law, the mobilization law went into effect on Monday as well. The streets are deserted. I mean, all over the country. Guys are just sending their wives out, man. They're staying at home. But nobody's going out because they don't want to get snatched up and sent to the front.
Yeah. I read some reports earlier this afternoon that there are people who have been grabbed off the streets, mobilized, and dead at the front 4 days later. I'm sure that's not an isolated event. I mean, because they don't have the time to train them. But that just brings up the one of the more anguishing parts of this to me. What is America's strategy here? We see all this stuff. I mean, I'm sure our leaders see a lot more than you and I do because they get all the classified stuff that's more or less bereft of all the spin and everything else. But yet, even if you only saw the open source stuff, we would have to be saying, this can't end well. There's no path to this ending well. And yet, you have this tweet sent out by the Secretary of State a couple of days ago talking about we're bringing Ukraine closer and then into NATO. And we're having this big thing planned for the July summit on July 8th, 9th, and 10th, I believe, where we're going to be having more fiction here. But Larry, what is our plan here? That's so much fiction. They might not even still be, the army might have even collapsed by July. I don't know. I can't predict it, but I know it's possible because of what, like I just showed you, where the guys are not wanting to give their lives to throw it away, where they're frustrated because they're fighting and they don't see the defenses. So they know their government lied to them. Yeah. I mean, what is our play here?
Well, look, our political class, political leadership, and it's not just Democrat, it's Republican as well, largely have become committed to spin and not holding anybody accountable. Look what happened in Afghanistan now 3 years ago in August when we collapsed and when we got 13 Marines at least killed because of failure of command decisions and failure of the national command leadership, Biden and company, to know what the hell they were doing. And yet out of that, where's the accountability? Who's been punished? Who suffered? The families who lost loved ones, they've suffered. So these guys have gotten so accustomed to lying to themselves as while they're lying to the American people, they just keep doing it because it's like a sickness, and they can't help themselves because no matter what they're saying, as long as they are not addressing the reality is going to come and kick them squarely in the teeth. And so, they're not going to be, at that point, they're going to have to try to go on the spend patrol.
So now I imagine that no matter what anybody in the Democratic Party would want to say, is that it has to be at least a serious consideration among the President Biden's team to let's try to drag the fiction out at least past November the 7th so they get it past the election date and then they can figure out whatever from there. But I don't know that they're going to succeed on that. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of an immoral position to try and hold off the reality from imposing itself and kicking us in the teeth, as you say, because there's men like that guy we just showed a minute ago, many like him, who are going to pay with their lives.
Well, right. And so you're seeing an increased number of desertions and of troops surrendering. Yeah, I don't see, frankly, how they sustain it beyond August, even if they can. It doesn't matter how much money the West sends. It doesn't matter. You got to have trained personnel. Just grabbing some guy off the street, as you pointed out, and then giving him a gun, dressing him up in a uniform and saying, okay, head off to the front line, he's going to be dead. And so what you need are trained, effective combat soldiers. And, you and I talked about that last time. You're looking at a training process, minimum 6 months. And if you're talking about anything that's involved with armor, et cetera, at least 12 months.
Yeah.
So, we don't have the magical ability to circumvent the whole process of training new recruits. No matter how old they are, they still got to go through that training regimen in order to develop the muscle memory, if nothing else, and the neural pathways, so that when it comes, if you're ambushed, you now know what you need to do as an immediate action drill instead of going, oh, what lesson was that? They're firing at me. Oh, yeah, take cover. I mean, there are certain things you do naturally if, loud noises and people shooting at you, you don't have to be trained for, but to deal with those in an effective manner. And then when you get into firing mortars, firing artillery, all of a sudden you got to have a few math skills, and you got to have some ability to remember some fairly complex steps. It's just not like, pull the rope,
Right.
My old Marine Corps boss, you call them lanyard pullers, get the lanyard pullers. But that it's not going to change, and yet we're sending these guys to their slaughter. The images of graveyards that are filling up, and in some cases they're emptying, they're digging up people from World War II, putting their bones in bags to go crush them, so they can put fresh bodies in the ground. It is that macabre.
I haven't seen that one. That is new. So somebody else who's seeing all this stuff is the Russian side and the Russian command. So based on all that you're seeing, what and the Russians are being aware of these dynamics and these calculations. What do you see as their, I guess, their strategy, both in the north and in the far east area, especially the Donetsk area, the Avdiivka area, the Bakhmut area, where they're going beyond where they had been before? What do you think? Do you see any kind of a big push? Because I keep hearing some reports of that. Or do you think they'll just keep the methodical pressure on to keep their troops casualties manageable, but still keep the pressure on? What do you see coming in, say, the next 4 to 6 weeks?
So their ops tempo is increasing, but what they're doing with that is they are now still continuing their attrition warfare, but they're bringing attacks, in at least 8 different locations all along that line of contact, and they're bringing it in some significant force. But they're not committing their troops. What they're doing is instead of putting guys forward in a human wave assault, that they're doing artillery, they're doing the glide bombs, they're doing drone attacks, and all that time they're also using drones to surveil troop locations. They're using missiles to hit troop assembly points in the rear. They're also taking out logistics lines of communication coming from back to front. And they're going to continue to press, but the pressure is going to grow because as time goes on, they've got increased number of troops. Like right now, guys that signed up a year ago are just starting to come online. The Russians are training them for 12 months.
So the Russians are doing what we suggested that the Ukraine should be doing, that they're training their troops before they bring them into the line.
Right. And when they get brought into the line, they are actually paired up with experienced combat vets, because there's nothing like experience to keep you from getting killed when you're fresh up there on the line of combat. So at some point, the Russians, I think they're going to collapse the Ukrainian army, but in collapsing it, also they know that they're bleeding NATO. NATO keeps sending material, tanks, and vehicles. Russians keep blowing them up, and they know that the United States, France, England, and Germany don't have the industrial capability to replace them.
Yeah, certainly not at scale or in time.
So, I mean, if you're Russian general staff, and the beauty of the Russian general staff as compared to, how the United States does planning, because the Joint Chiefs sit atop this monstrosity, but you always got these theater sinks that have quite a bit of independence and quite a bit of control in determining what the priorities are, what the strategies are for that particular region. It's not brought under one tightly controlled central location. The Russians do that, but within that central planning, they distribute and give a lot of authority out to guys who are at the major level and lieutenant colonel level. That they give them a lot of independence. The slag heap that was taken there at Avdiivka, this mountain of mining material that was enormous. The guy that took that was a major. And he was given largely the independence to figure it out, and he took it and he didn't lose any troops in the process. That was what was remarkable.
Wow. Yeah, that's there's been a lot of evidence. The West is belatedly coming to even openly acknowledge some of that stuff. They didn't for a long time, but that is starting to be admitted even in the public now that, actually the Russians are learning and they're getting better. They're doing what they have historically said. And I think that I've seen you say something early in the war. I definitely did, that if you know anything about Russian military history, they often start off really bad and then they figure it out and they move on and end up like a steamroller. And I think that they seem to be following that same path this time.
Yeah. Well, they didn't go out. The West made the false assumption at the outset that, Russia failed because they didn't capture Kiev. They had no intention of capturing Kiev. When they put that armored column up north, it was 24 to 40 miles long. Depending upon who you talk to, they just sat up there, and Ukraine had no wherewithal to attack it. I mean, you know what it's like. The last thing you want to be is in an armored column against an enemy that's got some air power, some fixed wing, and some rotary wing, because they're going to be trying to light you up like a 4th of July Roman candle.
Yeah, and I actually did. I went on CNN in the first week or two of the war when that first started, and that was my exact first thought. As somebody who had been in an army unit, I was like going, man, they're just sitting there. They would be just sitting ducks if the Ukraine had an air force. I mean, they would just get lit up. The whole thing would just get wiped out. But
exactly. They didn't. But what we're seeing is the Russians they're learning. They're not locked into this rigid doctrine, which is one of the mistakes that a lot of Western analysts make when they look at the Russians. They make some assumptions that, they're these ideological communists. They still think they're back in the Soviet Union. These guys, they're educated, they're flexible. But the one thing the Russians do is they proceed with the assumption that we may have a lot of guys fighting out there that may not be the brightest, that may not have the most intellectual skill. So we're going to make the weapons simple so that anybody can operate them, instead of making them so complex that if the operator goes down, all the rest of the troops are standing around going, good God, I don't know how to fix that thing.
Right.
So that's what they're doing.
So let me ask you a different question here as we kind of wrap up a little bit. What is the end game for America? Am I too cynical in saying I think that the White House just wants to get past the election date in November, and then they'll, I don't know, probably just do what they did in Afghanistan and just say, all right, we're going, we're done. Good luck to you in the future. Or is there some kind of an end game? Because I don't see any kind of action at all that would lead to conflict resolution, that would say, let's end the war, let's bring it to a conclusion and stop the killing, stop the risk of escalation, all that kind of stuff. All I see is, well, we'll give you more stuff. We'll think about letting you, shoot beyond the line or whatever. but nothing that's going to lead to any resolution. Do you
Right.
see anything that's going to lead to a conflict resolution from the United States?
Oh, no, nothing. Now, let me change the question. What should the United States be doing? Well, what is taking place right now is the U.S. position in the world as basically the leader of this international rules-based order is being dismantled. It's being eroded. The foundations of it are crumbling. So it's not just Ukraine. It's the United States' influence in the Middle East is evaporating. The United States has no answer for China. We keep telling China what to do, and China is just telling us to go pound sand. So all of a sudden, the United States control of our perception that we control the world, that's coming apart. Russia is just one symptom of this broader sickness that we're afflicted with. So you have to step back and say, what do we need to do as the United States to change our position so that we maintain our ability to be the dominant influence in the world? Well, that's going to actually require a lot of changes here internally, domestically in the United States, because we no longer have a common vision of what America is or should be. We're radically divided, and there's no sense of any common purpose anymore. And frankly, when you look at the lineup of political midgets we have for leaders, you don't have anybody of any kind of stature that would have the stature, whether it was of an Abraham Lincoln or a Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It's like we're being run by pygmies, and they're not. They have no strategic vision. They've declared our only options are we're either going to go to war with you or we're going to impose sanctions. You either do what we want or we're going to go to war or impose sanctions. Where's diplomacy?
Yeah.
Because I can give you an entire list of things. Russia is not our enemy. Russia should be our friend. It's a Christian country. They share our values in trying to defeat radical Islamic extremism. They would be with us that 100%. They are against drug trafficking and the abuse of and how that destroys societies. There's some places we could start, but the problem is the Russians aren't going to embrace the woke agenda where men can be women, women can be men, and then you promote the sexualization of children. They're not having any of that. So yeah, that's an obstacle. But the United States has no clear vision of where it is and what it's trying to do.
So I mean, if the Biden wins re-election, I mean, we can just expect the status quo to just continue on forward. But do you see if there would be any difference fundamentally, even if Trump were to win? Do you see anybody, the quality of people at these state Defense Department and some of the other senior levels that would be any different if it was a different administration?
No, sadly, I don't. Because name me one person that's standing up that's either in the Trump sphere or that's in the Biden sphere saying, hey, we need to stop this war. We need to back away. We need to stop funding the war in Ukraine. We need to come to an accommodation with Russia. We need to get back to where we're talking to the Russians and we're not calling them our enemy. Think, you're old enough to remember the Cold War. And during that entire Cold War, even though we had confrontations with the Soviets, we were always talking to them.
Yeah.
There were negotiations underway. We had we came to a variety of arms control agreements. There's none of that going on now. We are treating Russia, who is not a communist country, not an authoritarian dictatorship by any stretch, as if they are both of those things, and therefore we can't talk to them. And
although ironically, even when they were, we were talking to them. So
right,
it's even more
just
weird than that.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's one of the things that troubles me, and because I don't see anyone who's moving in a direction that can get us to a good outcome. They just want to have this fiction and this fantasy that Russia will be defeated, and they're not going to be defeated. And in fact, if you somehow, I don't know, inserted NATO troops and you want to conventionally win, well, then you're going to just trigger a nuclear confrontation. So there is no path that we could be on that's going to end well with where we're going. And we need to change fundamentally the course, I think.
Right. Well, what a lot of people don't understand is so over the last 20 years, we've really witnessed a place where technology has displaced the traditional military model we have. Because our model is this: we're an expeditionary military force where we've got Army and Marines that will deploy overseas. And the thrust of our power is naval power. We've got these ships, or had these ships, that we could use to help deploy troops. And we've got aircraft, airlift. Well, all of that presupposes that you're moving into a theater that is peaceful, that you've got control of, and that there's not a hostile enemy on the other side with air defense systems that can shoot down every fixed wing aircraft you bring into the area, and with hypersonic missiles that can blow up your ships. Well, that's where we are now.
That is
so
right.
All of a sudden, we've got this. It's like we've got the best horse in the horse cavalry, but we're fighting World War II.
As a cavalryman, I understand what that means, and that is exactly right. Yeah, you could have the greatest horse in the world, but hey, it ain't going to stop a machine gun. and we're in that same situation now. Again, you very eloquently just listed it out there. Listen, Larry, so much appreciate you coming on today and you sharing your insights on some of these things here. I mean, some of the things don't have really a great answer, but they have a right answer. So, and we're grateful for you. You know, if nothing else, we hold people's feet to the fire. We call out what's going on here. And I think that that's the best that we can do. And I hope that over time that enough people can be knowing and learning the truth, that maybe we can bring some pressure on these guys to do the right thing, even if they don't want to, just because we can bring the pressure of the light of truth on it. So thank you for coming on today.
Well, you're doing the Lord's work with your podcast.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that a lot, Larry. Really do. And listen, we thank you guys for joining us today and watching. Listen, the natural follow-on to this is what happens if we continue to do stupid things and we get into a situation with a nuclear war. I'm going to show you tomorrow with MIT professor Ted Postal why this is so dangerous. He's going to talk about and show you what might happen if a tactical nuclear weapon were detonated, or how things could escalate beyond there. It's an absolutely fascinating conversation we have tomorrow. You are not going to want to miss it. 1 p.m. on Friday. Please join us back then. Like and subscribe. Share this with everybody. Let them know, because I know a lot of people are going to want to see that episode. And we will see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.